borrow the dean's saying, it's a great American day.
It is great.
Welcome you all to opening the hearing on House Bill 1097, relative to taxation of income of New Hampshire residents when working remotely for an out-of-state employer, and recognize Representative Terosian for his remarks.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. I'm here as a prime sponsor to introduce House Bill 1097 as amended. This bill came about based on what happened during the pandemic with some of the out-of-state taxation policy that changed, particularly with the state of Massachusetts, that actually changed their law unilaterally to decide that any New Hampshire citizen that was working in the state of New Hampshire remotely for a company that was located in their state that never actually set foot in the state during their work duties could be taxed as though they were in the state. And we felt that was unfair, and so this legislation was brought forth to try to push back on that. We learned after drafting the bill and presenting the bill to the House Ways and Means Committee that Massachusetts has temporarily, I'll say temporarily because there's nothing to prevent them from bringing it back, they've quit doing that for the time being. We felt it was important, and the House Ways and Means Committee agreed that to have something in policy at the state level in the RSA that protects the state's position on this, and also individuals should that state or any other state decide to enact taxation for people working remotely. I mean, the fact is that remote working is probably not going to go away completely. It's probably here to stay. And the other fact is that the state that enacted this got a taste of easy money and did it in a fairly unilateral way that there's a distinct possibility they may be back, or other states may be back trying to infringe on New Hampshire citizens' rights there. So again, this legislation reinforces the states of New Hampshire's position. Any individual that faces this kind of taxation again in the future, primarily the governor has agreed with this concept as he instructed the Attorney General's office to prepare a suit with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't hear it, but there's nothing to prevent this coming before the Supreme Court again. I know there was testimony in the House Ways and Means that this bill, as it was amended, does reinforce and help not only the state's position should there ever be this come up before the Supreme Court, but it also helps an individual that may have to, file a suit to protect themselves. So I ask you to consider passing this legislation. It did pass, again, the House Ways and Means bipartisan vote, and also passed the full House with a bipartisan vote. With that, I'll conclude my testimony and answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Senator Daniels.
Thank you. Looking at the second or the third part regarding the business price tax, would that mean that if somebody was an employer for a company, say in Massachusetts, but they were working remotely from New Hampshire, that they would have to establish a business because they would be subject to business profits tax or business enterprise tax?
I don't think so, Senator, and thank you for the question. I think that was primarily the original language simply stated that that income earned in New Hampshire for somebody working remotely couldn't be taxed by the out of state. I think the Department of Revenue folks in the state wanted to clarify that this primarily applies to W-2 wages and not necessarily business taxes. I think they were concerned that with the original language that there could be a possibility that we may have a problem collecting business profit taxes here. So it basically makes business profit taxes untouchable, if you will, that it won't affect any relationship with a mass business that has business here that has to pay business profit taxes. They won't be able to do this in reverse and say, all right, we're immune from having to pay that.
Thank you.
Further questions? Hearing none, thank you very much. Signed up in favor, not speaking, Greg Moore from the Americans for Prosperity, New Hampshire. Signed up in favor and wishing to speak, Representative Spilsbury, House Ways and Means Committee from Rockingham 14. Welcome.
My name is Walter Spilsbury. Thank you. I represent Sullivan District 8, Charlestown, and I sit on the Ways and Means Committee. I took the lead in working with the DRA, Attorney Keen Wong, and with the Attorney General's Office, Assistant Attorney General Sam Garland, to develop the amendment that the committee adopted 17-6 and wrote the majority report. The testimony that I've provided you in writing is essentially identical to the committee's majority report, so I'll abbreviate, let you read that, and just address what exactly did the House Ways and Means Committee do with the bill. So the original bill, as introduced by Representative Terosian, essentially made a direct declaration that another state could not tax income earned exclusively within New Hampshire, and that they essentially had admonished the other state not to exercise its power in that fashion. We don't have the ability to directly enforce what another state does or how they interpret and assert their power. But we do have the ability to place into the statute a clear and unequivocal statement of policy and sovereign interest, so that the legislature in the state of New Hampshire is on record that it opposes and will take action to repel that broad assertion of power from another state. Now, the state could be Massachusetts again, it could be Maine or Vermont. We're surrounded by states that do have an income tax and have an interest in collecting as much as they can. But in a remote world, it could come from any other state, New York or what have you. It could come again in the form of a pandemic or resurgence of this pandemic or another one, but it could simply come because of evolving workplace patterns in a virtual world, or indeed even because gas prices rise enough that people decide to not commute and employers accommodate them. So the purpose of the bill, as amended and passed in House Ways and Means, and on the House floor, by the way, I think it was 255 to 70, very strong bipartisan support. It's essentially laid out in 78F1 so that the position of the state and its sovereign interest is directly asserted. And the purpose is to give the Attorney General standing when they go to court. Now, the Supreme Court, when they decided not to take the case, issued no written opinion. So one has to sort of guess. They're not obligated to state why they didn't take the case. But we believe that there's a dramatically greater chance that they would take such a case with this kind of a statute in place. I would just tell you that the F2 and F3 paragraphs were added at the suggestion of the DRA and drafted by the DRA. And the purpose, Senator Daniels, is simply to say that nothing in this bill in paragraph 1 changes or compromises the statutes that we already have regarding the BPT and the BET. So it creates no new obligation. It doesn't address what a corporation in another state might have to do if they're doing business in New Hampshire. It simply says that the purpose of the first paragraph is confined to personally generated income. So I think that pretty much gives you the outline, and glad to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee? I do, and you may or may not be able to answer this.
Sure.
Well, the vote in the committee was what? Something,
The vote in the committee was 17-6.
so can you quantify in any way the reason that 6 people voted against this?
Sure. And by the way, I see that Representative Ames is with us. I don't know if he intends to speak, but my understanding of the reservation of the 6 was that they were very much coming from one theme. They believed that what Massachusetts did was illegitimate, that it needed to be repealed, that something should be done, and that the legislature should specifically do something. But I don't think that they were satisfied that the language had reached a state where it provided the silver bullet to absolutely guarantee that we would prevail in court. And I would have to agree with them. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but I think it's as good as we could come up with at this time. If it could be improved, I think that would be marvelous. But I do think the legislature has to act, and I don't think we really have the luxury of time, because the circumstances of this past situation demonstrated that it can occur suddenly without notice.
So as a follow-up,
Yes.
I'd be interested in a discussion of the improvements that you think might be made, if, in your estimation, or Representative Chairman Major's opinion, they would not jeopardize passage of the bill. If we can make it
Sure.
better, that's what we'd like to do. But I defer to the.
Well, if it would be helpful, and I don't know that the bill needs to be amended for these 2 specific reasons, but I recall that during the committee's discussion, there were 2 specific points that were made. The first is that in the caption of paragraph 1, 78F1, the word purpose appears. And one of our members questioned whether purpose was too soft. I pointed out the fact that the caption directly above it and in the new chapter position, the word position is used. So if it behooves you, position rather than purpose might strengthen the intent of that paragraph. The second specific change that came up in the discussion of House Ways and Means was in the line 8, towards the end, the word may is used. So it says, for services entirely performed within the state of New Hampshire may not be subject to taxation as earned income. And the suggestion was made by 2 members that perhaps that word should have been shall, so that it was a stronger, more assertive word. My personal feeling was that may not, those 2 words taken together means you do not have permission, we do not acquiesce. So I think the language is adequate as it is in both places, but could potentially be improved in both places. No other specific suggestion was made at the time that the House Ways and Means Committee deliberated on the bill.
Okay. All right, thank you for your testimony.
Sure, thank you.
Next up, testifying in favor, actually, you already did, never mind. In favor, not testifying, Representative John Janigan from House Ways and Means, and testifying against, Representative Ames from House Ways and Means. Welcome, Representative. Good to see you again.
And good to see you too. Yes, I'm here to speak in opposition to this bill in a qualified sort of way. I endorse the purpose as stated in the first paragraph and believe that it could be helpful. I'm not sure at all that it will prove to be helpful to have a firm statement, clear statement by the states, so that the next time a state like Massachusetts does what Massachusetts did, which was to tax the personal income earned by individuals, not businesses, individuals that were doing all of the work in New Hampshire. It was really a function of COVID. They went home and didn't come back because of COVID. But in those circumstances, Massachusetts reached out and pulled that income in and taxed it. And New Hampshire protested and tried to stop that with a lawsuit which failed. So if we can strengthen our hand for future situations, that would be great. Problem I have with this is that it's sort of two-faced, if you will. In the first paragraph, 78-F:1, there's the very strong statement about the sovereign interest of the state. So that's good. Although the word may that Representative Spilsbury pointed to probably should be shall. I don't really care about the word purpose at the beginning. I don't think it adds or subtracts. It's just a word. But the problem comes with the scope of that first paragraph, which becomes clear when you start thinking about why the next two paragraphs were added at DRA's request. I think it harks back to questions that I asked during the hearing. Don't we, New Hampshire, tax through our business taxes personal income that is generated by services performed entirely by individuals working outside of New Hampshire as part of our business tax? You know, through the sale, we've gone to single sales factor. We're going to have a lot of businesses outside of New Hampshire. I hope we have few businesses inside New Hampshire, but a lot of businesses outside New Hampshire, which will be selling into New Hampshire on the basis of services that have been performed largely, but probably not entirely, by all of their staff. They'll have some nexus with New Hampshire. And we'll tax those services using the apportionment system that we have, which assigns income this way and that way. And in the future, we're using the single sales factor. So we're doing it. We're taxing the other guys' services performed in the other state through our business tax. That's why I believe these sections were added in, because we don't want to undermine our business tax. Well, we can't really have it both ways. So I think we need to, if we're going to do this, work on that purpose section and focus it on the circumstance that arose between us and Massachusetts, which was a personal, individual income situation. I'm not sitting here with language on it. We didn't have time to work on this. This language actually came to us the day we voted, I believe. If I'm wrong, I'll be corrected, but we didn't really work on this in the committee. It was a product of some good work done by Representative Spilsbury, maybe Representative Jernigan was a part of that, with the Attorney General's office, but it wasn't really processed. I think there needs to be some good work done on this language to make sure that it doesn't pull in stuff that we're doing and compromise that. And if we're going to not do that, then we've got a position here that's not going to persuade the Supreme Court to take the case. They're going to look at this and say, well, on the one hand, they say that they have this sovereign interest, but on the other hand, they say, and if any other state has people working in their state, and we, New Hampshire, tax that income, that's okay. So it's two-faced, and I don't think it will get us very far with the Supreme Court. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Senator Daniels.
Thank you. While acknowledging, that there may be more that we can do to strengthen what's here, are we better having the laws silent and not mentioning it, or are we better putting something in so that as another state is looking at it, it is understanding our intent?
Well, I guess I answer it depends on what we have, what we put. If we're silent, then we can deal with the particular situation that comes up and respond to it. If it's improper taxation by our neighboring state or some other state, we've got, I think, a good legal foundation to challenge that. Standing was an issue in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire situation, and I'm not schooled enough in the exact problem that was encountered to speak to it. But I think we can respond, but perhaps not as forcefully if we don't have good language like this in here. So as I say, I would work towards better language and not concede that another state can tax in the situation that arose last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was. With our existing law, I don't think this adds anything if we go forward with this bill as it's written myself. I think it's too compromised by what I tried to point to.
Thank you.
Further questions? I have a couple. Thank you for your testimony, Representative. Under Chapter 78F on line 4, position on out-of-state taxation of remote worker income. Might we be better termed using the phrase remote worker personal income?
I'm trying to find you. Wait a minute.
That might
what
help
line number are
segregate
you
the
on?
issue.
What line number are you on?
Line 4, position on out-of-state taxation
Oh, I see.
of remote worker personal income.
Yeah,
Might better
something like that.
segregated from the
Yeah.
ETBBT question.
Something like that. What I would suggest actually is the best people to work on this with you is the DRA people. They know this stuff far better than I do. But yes, that's the direction that I'd like to see this go.
All right, so my next question is, your concern with sections F2 and F3 is that it opens the door for the court to then interfere in already existing law. If it's not part of what we have here, then we limit their scope in their trial, or whatever you want to call it, to only the language relevant to that worker's personal income, we don't even introduce the possibility. I believe that once you put it in print, it's part of the law. The court looks at that provision of the law, and that opens the door to their interpretations of whatever they want to do.
I think that could be so. And again, I'd say DRA needs to help us think that through. They were the source of this language. I wasn't privy to those conversations, but it was obviously a concern. They wanted to protect our tax situation, and maybe this language exposes it. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. And maybe it does, I don't know, but work it through with them. I think there's a legitimate concern here that needs to be at least understood and perhaps changed.
Sure, we'll have DRA come up here in a little bit. Any other questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, DRA, I would like you to help us out with the rationale for the language that you have.
Morning, Senators. My name is Keen Meng Wong, Tax Policy Counsel from the Department of Revenue.
Okay. Yep. Can you explain the rationale for adding F2 and F3?
Right. Just to state on the outset, the DRA, we did help in redrafting this bill, and we do not have a position on the bill. We just wanted to make sure that the interests of the administration of the current business taxes are intact and not and not jeopardized. So the purpose of the of sections 2 and 3 is basically just that, is to ensure that that whatever that is mentioned in in section 1 does not really interfere with the administration of the BPT and BET. The what's mentioned in chapter 1 specifically, if just reading through it, it is specifically does not necessarily, may not necessarily implicate the business profits tax and the business enterprise tax. However, we do have a slight concern that that it may be read to say alternatively. So currently it's saying that that residents of New Hampshire performing activities in New Hampshire shall not be subject to taxation as earned income. The income that's generated shall not be taxed as earned income in the other state. So our concern is that either practitioners or taxpayers may read it on the inverse. Then what happens if some outside of New Hampshire taxpayers conducting activities outside of New Hampshire, as well as and then selling services into New Hampshire, then would that mean that New Hampshire shall not be able to tax that? So we were concerned with that kind of reading. It does not specifically say so on the section 1, but we have that concern. So we wanted to make sure that we put in sections 2 and 3 there. And we also didn't want to add any more to section 1, specifically like the definition of earned income.
Can you speak up or pull the mic a little bit closer? Thanks.
Sorry. And we also didn't want to add any more to section 1 because specifically like for an example, the terms used earned income, it's not defined anywhere what is earned income. It's not defined in our New Hampshire business tax statutes as well. However, it is defined in the IRS code, and that would if we use that terminology, it may include the sole proprietor income because that's earned income as well. So and that's taxed in for business profits tax.
All right. So we don't have a definition of earned income here in New Hampshire. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware, yes.
All right. So might it be appropriate to amend the bill to read federally defined earned income? Would that capture what we need done so that we now do have a definition and we base it on the federal?
The concern is that because earned income, from the federal perspective, includes proprietorship income as well, and that's our concern, is that we didn't want anything to jeopardize our ability to tax proprietorship income from a business profits tax perspective.
All right. So could we then put a definition of income in, of earned income in?
I believe we can, because, and one more thing is also because this would enlarge the scope. I would assume that this would enlarge the scope of the bill even more, and we don't, the DRA does not administer a personal income taxation, and for us to make any kind of recommendation for something that we don't really administer, it might just, we may not be provide the best solution.
I would offer that many of the laws that we write bring in definitions of terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're using it and your concern is that we don't define it,
Yeah.
that's another open door
Mm-hmm.
in a court case. And so we
Yeah.
want to close as many of those portholes in
Yeah.
the ship that we're trying to sail as we can. So do you think the department could come up with a definition? And we can put that in the bill,
We could try.
okay?
Yes. And
So as not to interfere with
Right.
BET or the proprietorships.
yes, we can definitely try. And also just to add to that, and that's the reasons for sections 2 and 3 in there. It's just to make sure that there's that boundary that whatever that's mentioned in purpose in section 1 does not interfere with the BPT and BET administration.
So not being an attorney, I would ask you this. As I had earlier spoken to Representative Ames, if we took out 2 and 3, F2 and F3, okay, we foreclose on the, do we not foreclose on the court's opportunity to then drag those into the debate? If it's not part of our law, okay, then it doesn't exist, and it cannot be used to then leverage an entree to come after and attack us on those, on the BET or BPT.
I do not share that same belief, because sections 2 and 3 specifically says that that BPT and BET goes on as before, and we're not making any kind of concessions towards BPT or BET in sections 2 and 3. So, and I don't believe having sections 2 and 3 in there jeopardizes the BPT and BET.
I would disagree, and I'd maybe allow to talk to Attorney General Formula, because if we don't have this in the law, they can't attack it. And our already existing laws then are in force. All right, we put this in, if this goes to court, now they can start going after anything that's in the statute. And so that would be my concern. I'm not an attorney, but I've seen enough Supreme Court cases to say they can only rule on specifically what's brought before them. If we put this in, that then becomes possible to be brought before them and then start going after the BET and BPT components and the concerns that were expressed earlier by the Representative Ames. So that I think needs some work. And I'd certainly, I'm going to talk to Attorney General Formella on behalf of the committee to get a reading on that.
Yep.
So we want a bullet that has as few attachments as possible available to attorneys from the other side,
Right.
to try to start interfering with our taxes. If we don't put it in, I think they can't touch it, but that's what I think. So I'll get a confirmation on that. The department would then look to develop a definition for the purposes of this statute of income, earned income.
Sure.
All right.
Yep.
And any questions, Senator Daniels?
Do we have a definition of remote worker?
Not that I know, no.
I think we probably, when we hear the words, I think we tend to think of somebody working via Zoom or something. But I'm wondering if I was employed by a company in Massachusetts as a salesperson, and my territory was New Hampshire, would I be considered a remote worker? How am I taxed? Can Massachusetts tax me by what I earn in New Hampshire?
So for the income earned by that salesperson, by the income, for the tax for the income earned by the salesperson.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how a situation like that might fit into what we're trying to prevent
Right.
here. Is that going to affect?
Yeah, I don't think we have a definition for remote work, and once again, because we don't tax personal income, so that may be the reason why we don't have a definition for remote worker.
Okay, thank you.
So would that be something the committee would like as well address? I think the more clearly we define the terms that we're using, the less latitude there is to misconstrue them.
Yep.
Any other questions, concerns? Be happy to work with the department to develop an amendment and, on behalf of the committee, so we can do this, okay?
Yep.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So no one else has signed up to speak. Is there anyone who has spoken once and would like to speak again, or first who hasn't spoken at all and would like to speak for a first time? Hearing none, Representative, please come forward.
Thank you again, Senator Gatta. Just want to very briefly address what was mentioned after I spoke. The tension and the concern about the potential for misinterpretation is something that the DRA expressed to House Ways and Means, and we wanted to take it seriously. I personally felt that the bill would have been better without paragraph 2 and 3. And I think, so I'm speaking for myself, that the idea of defining earned income in a way that then perhaps makes paragraph 2 and 3 not necessary is a good path to pursue. And so I would certainly endorse that. My other comment is that it's easy to get confused about how the business tax works because states operate across state borders. But we don't, in our BET or BPT, presume to tax activity that occurs in other states. We're trying to figure out, as all 50 states do, how to tax activity that does occur in New Hampshire. And that's why apportionment formulas have been developed. So the apportionment formula, in fact, in many cases, it's got a worldwide context. But that is not the same thing as taxing particularly labor that was performed in another state. So we're talking here specifically about wage and salary income. And I think we should resist the temptation to think that there is as much that needs to be clarified.
So would you then support the definition of income earned in New Hampshire or not?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it's worth defining, and especially if it can be defined in a way that satisfies everybody, including DRA.
Right.
Paragraphs 2 and 3 are not necessary.
exclude
If the
DPT.
definition is that good, then I think that would be another secondary improvement. In terms of the derivation of the language, the first paragraph derives from my draft as modified by Attorney Sam Garland, and it was, and the DRA provided paragraphs 2 and 3, and in the package, when it was put together, was specifically presented to Attorney General Formula. So he's familiar with the bill.
Okay. Thank you. Any further comments or any further questions? Hearing none, sir.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to address the concern on the remote worker that the senator brought up about, say, somebody that's working out of Massachusetts for a sales company and they're deriving their income in their territory in the state of New Hampshire. Under the way the law has been prior to the Massachusetts changing that, any New Hampshire resident that, whether it's a sales job or any other job that's performed in New Hampshire, they can prorate that. So they don't pay income tax to that other state for the work that's performed here, whether it's remote, on Zoom or now working at home almost exclusively for some people. That's always been part of the provision. So I think we certainly want to retain that New Hampshire residents don't have to pay tax on income that they earn here in the state. I just want to try to clarify that.
Is that a presumption in this legislation, or does that need to be stipulated?
Well, I didn't think it needed to be.
Does existing law already cover that?
I believe so. I
Okay,
believe
so
so.
we don't need to amend this bill.
Right.
Right.
That would be my
For that
my
concern.
understanding. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Hearing none? Thank you again. Anyone else who wishes to testify that hasn't? All right, so from the remote testify list, we have Mr. Joseph Brown, a member of the public representing himself in support. Mr. Alvin C., a member of the public representing himself in support. And Mr. or Mrs., don't know, Robin Scott, a member of the public representing themselves as in support. Hearing no further discussion on this bill, we will call the hearing to House Bill 1097 closed. All right. We'll now open the hearing on House Bill 1221 relative to the rate of the business profits tax and recognize Representative Notter as the prime sponsor. Welcome, Janine.
Good morning, Senators. I'm the prime sponsor for House Bill 1221. It's a very simple bill. They amended it, so it's just a very slight reduction in the business profits tax from 7.6% to 7.5%. And the reasoning for this bill is because we made a promise to the taxpayer, to the business community in 2017 to lower the taxes. So it's as simple as that.
Any questions for Representative Notter? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm sorry, the sound system is not good here, so I didn't hear what you said the purpose of lowering the BPT rate was.
We made a promise to the business community in 2017 to lower the business taxes in order to grow the economy in New Hampshire. So this is in keeping our promise.
Oh,
Thank
sure.
you. So we've already done that. Why?
No, we didn't. We did part of it. If everything had stayed intact, this would have already been in place. I have it written down. I'm sorry. If the timeline from the budget in 2017 had remained intact, the rates that are included in HB 1221 before they amended it would already be law. But then we had COVID and everything just went haywire. So this is to continue keeping our promise.
Thank you.
Further questions from members of the committee? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our business taxes have been reduced year after year after year after year. Went from 8.1 to 7.9, which we thought was acceptable. Business accepted that as reasonable. We were competitive. Now this takes it from 7.6 to 7.5. I mean, how far down do you think the business taxes have to go to make them competitive? Would no tax be the appropriate methodology that you're looking for?
Did you say no tax?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Well, if we're up to me. The lower the taxes are, the better it is for the economy.
Further question?
Sure.
The lower the taxes are, the lower the revenue that's produced to manage state government. Would you agree with that?
Well, we aren't asking for zero tax. It's just 7.6 to 7.5, which is not unreasonable.
I'd like to make a comment, and I talked to the LBA this morning. For the month of March, business taxes are about 38 million ahead of plan. March revenue from all sources is about 46 million ahead of plan for the month. Year-to-date revenue is approximately $230 million ahead of plan. There's more than enough room to take a 0.1% cut in this tax. And as we can tell from the historic record of the legislature lowering taxes, our revenues continue to increase, at which we want not to do that, but with the $230 million surplus so far this year, I don't have concern. And I think that we can argue all day about whether the revenues go up or down, but the data is what drives my decision. We lowered the taxes despite protestations that we're gonna cause deficit. The revenues keep increasing, and so I'm a believer that the businesses are far better users of revenues to grow their businesses, increase benefits, those types of things, to increase employment, to develop new widgets, new markets, which in turn generates the revenues that we need to operate as a state. And I think that's borne out in the data that continues to accrue year after year regarding the revenue impact of tax reduction.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Mr. Senator Guida.
I was reading your mind. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I like to think that we help New Hampshire businesses first, and half of them don't even pay the business profits tax. So my question is, wouldn't it be more helpful to New Hampshire businesses to raise the filing threshold so that fewer New Hampshire businesses would even be subject to the BPT rather than cutting taxes for the largest multinational corporations that this bill would help the most?
I'll refer that question to a speaker that comes after me.
I would make a comment if there's been some handouts provided, okay? And in answer to your question, Senator, out-of-state corporations made up only 10.6% of BPT payers in 2019. The remaining 89.4% that paid BPT in 19 were New Hampshire-based businesses. So there's a lot of information here that we just received. And I'm happy to recess for 5 or so minutes to allow us to review that individually, and then we'll call back into session. So we're 5-minute recess. Yeah, 5 minutes. You want to? It's so we can read this stuff. Just hand it. Yes.
$100 million in revenue losses attributable to prior year cuts in the BPT tax rate. And I hasten to add that these are static analyses. This is how DRA does its revenue projections or assessment of a fiscal impact of a bill. They're static analysis. This is a dynamic world we live in, so things work out differently, but that's what these numbers represent. The business profits tax is paid mostly by big business. Of the 77,866 businesses that filed business property tax returns for fiscal year 2019, just 671, or about 1% of all filers, paid close to 80% of the $515 million in business property tax revenue received that year. 80 of these high-end filers had taxable profits above $1 million per year. These high-end filers, mostly, if not exclusively, out-of-state international corporations, will be the primary beneficiaries of HB 1221's single decimal point tax rate reduction. For these, or the average tax break for each of the top 80 would be about $36,700 based on fiscal year 2019 data. In contrast, about 59,400 businesses, or 76% of all businesses filing BPT tax returns in 2019, would get no benefit from the new HB 1221 tax breaks, since their net profit after all credits will remain too low to be taxable. In the middle of the 2019 business profit taxpayer range, about 7,800 taxpayers, those with net business property tax paid in fiscal year 2019 of between $1,000 and $10,000, will receive on average just a $49 tax break from the HB 1221 single decimal point rate reduction. Testimony that we received in the House Ways and Means Committee included no persuasive evidence, really no evidence at all, demonstrating that a single decimal point rate reduction would have any noticeable impact on business decisions to move to or depart from New Hampshire. State revenues have been high this year, as you've noted, and they are high. Most likely because, and this is my personal view, because New Hampshire has benefited from a huge temporary infusion of COVID-related federal funds and from soaring worldwide corporate profits realized by our largest business property taxpayers. But even so, the state's revenues have proved insufficient to meet a number of local school and essential human service funding needs. Property tax rates have been forced up this year in many property poor jurisdictions where state aid, particularly state school aid, has failed to keep up with essential needs. In Jaffrey, where I live, state school aid is substantially down from fiscal year 2021 levels, and the school tax rate is expected to rise this year by about $3 per thousand of assessed property valuation, translating to a $300 property tax increase for each of the $100,000 of business property valuation. This property tax increase will, for most business property taxpayers in Jaffrey, dwarf any tax break received because of HB 1221. And even with that $3 per thousand school tax rate increase, the public school system in
Would the representative suspend for a moment? I'd like you to keep your remarks focused on the bill that's under consideration. We're not talking about property taxes. We're talking about House Bill 1221. And I would appreciate it if you.
Well, I'll move on from that, but
constrain your remarks to that.
I believe that the alternatives should be considered. That's all I'm trying to say in consequences. Testimony on this bill provided no, I've said that before, so I'm not going to repeat this. Since 2014, rapid national and global growth, and more recently, enormous federal stimulus funding for state businesses and consumers alike, have masked, hidden the state's revenue losses due to tax cuts given mostly to our largest businesses over the last 6 years. As the stimulus fades and as new recession threatens, our revenue situation could become dire. I think the single decimal point business property tax cut is mindless and senseless. I oppose House Bill 1221 and hope that you will agree. That's what I have to offer.
Any questions for Representative Ames? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Speaking in favor, I'm going to ask Representative Janigan. Janesian? Close.
It's very close. It's a hard G, so it's Janigian.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Welcome, members of the Senate. So basically, HB 1221, just to give it some context, in Ways and Means, when we first got the bill, obviously it lowered the business profits tax and the business enterprise tax. And under careful consideration, given that many taxes have been reduced in the last few years, we looked at the fiscal note, and it was going to lower the business enterprise tax, lowering from 0.55 to 0.50 was going to mean a hit to the state of about 27.5 million, and lowering the business profits tax was a hit of about 7.5 million in future years. So that total being about 36 million, we being prudent, we said, okay, let's just lower the business profits tax portion at this time. As Representative Nodder said, it does satisfy a commitment we made to the business community several years ago to get to 7.5%. Back at that time, the business profits tax was actually 8.5%. So this would eventually get us one point lower. And the question even is it an $8 million decrease? Because we have seen over time that as we've been reducing taxes, we've seen an increase in revenue coming to the state, even pre-pandemic. So it's not like, yes, the COVID relief funds may be making it a little more confusing, but we already saw changes and increased revenue prior to the pandemic. But given that, there is some question there, we eliminated the business enterprise tax out of this. And I've heard some say that we're helping big business. Well, 90% of the businesses that will be helped in this are New Hampshire-based businesses. And small businesses are also being helped by the fact that the threshold was increased on the BET and the BPT. So we are actually helping small businesses in those cases. Basically, when we compare at 7.5%, we'll compare very favorably with other states. Our neighbor to the south, Massachusetts, is at 8.0%. And is it Vermont? In Vermont is 8.5%. As soon as you net over 25,000, you're paying 8.5% in Vermont. So we compare very favorably. So I would argue that this moderate tax reduction of 0.1% does make sense. It's a rate reduction that's good for New Hampshire businesses. It encourages businesses to expand that are already here. It encourages new businesses to form, and it should encourage business to come to the state. And at the end of the day, that all helps workers have more options and more opportunity for employment. So I would argue, and I'm in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Daniels.
Could not the savings from a reduction in the tax be used for the employer to put back for retention of its workers, since we seem to have a problem getting them now?
I certainly would agree with that. I mean, it's not like any savings to a business gets stuffed into a mattress. It could be used for what you just said, or it could be used to expand. It could be used in many ways. Yes.
Further questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Spilsbury. Okay, okay. I was here in favor but not testifying, I'm sorry. Sure.
Yin Mei Wong, Tax Policy Counsel from Department of Revenue.
Devin Roderick, Senior Financial Analyst, Department of Revenue.
Speak up, louder is better.
Devin Roderick,
Yeah, you gotta get the mic right up to your face,
Devin Roderick, Senior Financial Analyst, Department of Revenue.
okay? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you very much. So we have already made some, at least Senate moves that will lower business taxes. I know that we declared the PPP loans were not going to be taxed. And that was going to cost like $90 million. And then earlier this session, we passed a bill that I think had to do with, it was so complicated, I couldn't even describe it, but it was going to cost $8.5 billion, I think. So what is the cumulative amount of every proposal, including this one, that the cumulative amount of lower taxes on business? Does the department know, or could you get back to us?
We'd be happy to put together a chart, and the timing of those different changes varies from fiscal year to fiscal year. We'd be happy to forward that information along as it relates to the business profits and business enterprise tax.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would note as well, however, that while you can project reductions in revenue to the state, you in no way can project the increases in business revenues to the companies that pay the tax, which will offset those reductions. Is that correct? You're not able to make those projections.
That's a fair assumption, yes.
Thank you.
And our, I just want to add that our analysis are all static analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, pull that right up to your face.
And just want to add that our analysis in our fiscal notes are all static analysis based on historical information.
Okay. All their analyses are static. Right.
Yeah, so the fiscal impact on the proposed bill was based on revenue for fiscal year 21. It does not make any assumptions going forward.
Okay. Is that fiscal impact cumulative over years going forward based on 21 revenues, or is it only on 21 revenues itself?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So the proposed bill for the business profits tax rate reduction, we based the fiscal analysis on the taxable base of fiscal year 21, and then we took the impact and timed it out based on the effective date of this legislation. So the effective revenue loss in our static analysis would be 1.8 million in fiscal year 23, then 7.2 million in fiscal year 24, and the cumulative impact fully realized would end up being 8.4 million.
Thank you. Please, Senator.
Here, thank you. Is DRA able to, well, let me say that I read the daily revenues every day too, and I noticed that our BET is still running 4% below plan for the fiscal year to date. And I guess my question is the department able to parse out at all to what extent the high BPT versus plan is influenced by doing business with fewer employees and having with businesses having raised prices due to external factors? Is that something the department has looked at or even can look at?
So to give you an idea of fiscal year to date, like you mentioned, at the end of February, compared to plan, Business profits tax was 33.5% above plan. Business enterprise tax was 12.3% below. Most of that revenue fiscal year to date is attributable to estimate payments. And starting this month in March and in April, their returns are due. We'll be able to better decipher to a point what the nature of that increase or decrease is, and they'll true up stuff in March and April. But however, those ones file an extension, we wouldn't have a full picture of what's driving those numbers until the fall.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much. And we'll look for that information, right? All right, Greg Moore, Americans for Prosperity, is speaking and in favor. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Still morning. Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. For the record, my name is Greg Moore. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, New Hampshire, here today to testify in support of House Bill 1221. This is not new ground. The rate for the BPT that is proposed in here was passed in the 2017 budget. It was passed by this committee in Senate Bill 13 last year. Our perspective is we support House Bill 1221. We think it's good policy. However, we would encourage the committee to consider adding the bill as it was introduced to also include the reduction from 55 to 50 basis points on the business enterprise tax. That would truly harmonize it with the legislation that was passed in 2017, House Bill 2, as well as Senate Bill 13, which this committee and the Senate passed last year. We think it's important to provide as broad tax relief as possible to businesses, and the business enterprise tax is a way to do that. We have a lot more BET taxpayers in the state than we have BPT taxpayers in New Hampshire. And moreover, the BET is paid by businesses who are often breaking even or losing money, whereas the business profits tax, by definition, are paid by profitable businesses. So we would encourage the committee to obviously 1221 we would fully support it as it's passed, but we would ask you to consider harmonizing it with the legislation you passed last year in Senate Bill 13, which would reduce the business enterprise tax from 55 basis points to 50. Ultimately, our focus is on making New Hampshire as competitive as possible. And while it's obviously a case where we want to bring new big businesses into the state, making them more profitable, but it's also as important that we have a thriving environment for startup businesses. And having spoken to some people who started up businesses in New Hampshire, the business enterprise tax is certainly a problem for them because they are often losing money for the first few years of their life cycle. We would love to keep them and have them grow and be long-term big New Hampshire businesses, homegrown businesses. But if they move out of state because of our business enterprise tax, chances are we're going to lose them for good. So having had those conversations with entrepreneurs, and actually I spoke to one last week who told me that he was, because of the BET, he was moving his business from New Hampshire to Massachusetts, which seems counterintuitive to me, but it was precisely because of the business enterprise tax. And for that reason, I would ask the committee to consider going back to the original bill of House Bill 1221, and again, putting it back in sync with Senate Bill 13, which this committee and the Senate passed last year. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? Senator Daniels.
Do you know what the BET rates are regionally?
BET is not a tax that is traditional in terms of a business tax. It's comparing apples and oranges. All the states surrounding us regionally have an income tax, so that they don't go the payroll tax route as far as from collecting tax from businesses. They go the other way of just collecting it from the individuals. So in New Hampshire, we've chosen the BET, and I mean, obviously, you know, the legal basis for having the BET based on litigation that was being brought forth in the late 80s and early 90s. I'm sure Senator D'Alessandro could give a lecture on that. But the other states don't have taxes on payrolls like the BET, they go the income tax route.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call DRA back up for just one question. So if I were to want to look at reducing the BET tax, but given the concern that Senator Rosenwald has it running behind on that, but then given the information you've said that this stuff trues up later this fall, can you look at or to establish any kind of a pattern in past years where we would see BET running below projections at this point in the cycle, then either meets or exceeds later? Is that something that the data that you might be able to pull out?
Sure, we'll take a look at our past data and we'll definitely send the committee what we find.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Anyone else have any questions on that? Thank you. Next up, we'll have Dave Gervais from the BIA. So are you still in your acting role or have you changed positions?
I'm happy to say I have reverted back to my senior vice president status and am no longer serving as interim president, for which I am grateful.
Your hair is still white.
It is, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Dave Gervais. I'm a Senior Vice President for Public Policy with the Business and Industry Association. I know you're all familiar with our association, but we have roughly 400 plus employer members with over 90,000 employees in the state. So I just want to respond to a couple of things. I should say that we're here in support of 1221 today and hope that you will act favorably on it. Earlier, a testifier referred to out-of-state large international corporations, and they're a frequent target for criticism, I think, but we should remind ourselves that those out-of-state corporations or international corporations are very important to New Hampshire's economy. They're taxpayers in this state because they have business operations in this state, meaning they have employees that work here. Tens of thousands of employees. So let's not forget in our rush to criticize a bill because it might benefit large out-of-state corporations that there is an impact for New Hampshire jobs. So I did want to state that. I also wanted to respond to the business enterprise tax running lower than projections. I don't have the ability to research the way our Department of Revenue Administration does, but because that is primarily a payroll tax, it wouldn't surprise me if that's due to what we're seeing in the workplace, which is lower employment, companies not able to hire the people that they need. And so if you've got lower employment, that means lower BET collections. Interestingly, that translates into higher BPT collections because employers in this state have the ability to take a dollar for dollar credit on the BET towards the business profits tax. So if they're paying less in BET because they are not at full employment, it actually means they're going to be paying more in BPT. As to the bill itself, we agree it is a relatively modest reduction. It is a reduction to a business tax rate that has been discussed for many years here, recently in the legislature, lowering it from 7.6% down to 7.5%. I would suggest now is almost a perfect time to be considering this because we have the revenues that would allow, if there's a fiscal impact, to easily reduce this rate without having it impact our overall state budget. If we look to past years going back as far as 2016, where the business tax rates began to be phased in, every fiscal year, the state ended up with more business tax revenue than they expected, sometimes in the hundreds of millions of dollars more. Our rainy day fund is flush. It's never been healthier because of that. And I just think this makes a perfect time to pass this legislation. And I would agree, it is a modest reduction, but it's still an important reduction. And there are organizations around the country that keep track of these things. And to be able to reduce our business tax rates at a time when other states are at best keeping them even, and in some cases raising them, does send a powerful message. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Peggy Gilmore. Is she here? Okay, that's right, you're in favor but not speaking, I'm sorry. Drew Klein from the Josiah Bartlett Center, speaking in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will try to be brief, but I wanted to give the committee some context because there's a lot of numbers flying around, and we obtain our data. I'm Drew Klein from the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy, right? So everybody knows. This is all state data. We get all of these numbers from Revenue and Administrative Services reports. So none of this is made up. These are actual state numbers, and you can go to the state reports to verify them. So we just want to point out that New Hampshire right now has the third lowest corporate tax rate in New England, thanks to the business tax rate cuts that started in fiscal year 2016. We're at 7.6%. Connecticut is 7.5%. This 0.1% rate reduction would tie us with Connecticut for the second lowest business tax rates in New England, which is a huge accomplishment in a short number of years. What does this mean for revenue? Well, let's look at it. From fiscal year 2012 through fiscal year 2021, business tax revenues in New Hampshire exceeded budget projections by $649.6 million. Since the start of this fiscal year in July, business tax revenues are $91.5 million, or 18.5% above plan, and $121.3 million, which is 26% above the prior year. If you add this to the 2012 through 2021 numbers, you get business tax revenues that have come in over budget by $741 million since 2012. That's how much we have overtaxed New Hampshire businesses beyond what we budgeted to spend. To get an idea of just how much larger these business tax revenues are, let's look at inflation. In fiscal year 2012, business profits tax revenue from July through December was $140.5 million. If you adjust that for inflation, that would amount to $166 million in 2021 dollars. Actual BPT revenues for July through December of 2021 were $381 million. That is $240.7 million to be precise, or 171% higher than in 2012. That's astonishing. Combined BPT and PET revenues for the first 6 months of fiscal 2012 were $231 million. In the first 6 months of this fiscal year, they were $501.8 million. That's a 216.5% increase. So that's how much extra money New Hampshire is taking in for business tax revenue for perspective purposes. To address the revenue shortfalls from cutting rates, business tax rate reductions that began in the 2016 fiscal year did not cause business tax revenue to fall below previous levels as had been predicted. If you remember, in 2016, the governor predicted that the rate cuts would reduce business tax revenues by $90 million in fiscal year 2016. Instead, that year they were $132.8 million above plan. In 2017, the LBA predicted an $11 million reduction in business tax revenues because of the rate cuts. Instead, in fiscal year 2017, business tax revenues were $151.6 million above plan. From the 4 years from 2016 to 2019, remember the rate cuts began in 2016. So in the next 4 fiscal years, business tax revenues came in above plan by $476.6 million. Those are facts. That's state data. The tax cuts did not cause revenues to decline. Revenues increased. A lot of people will say they did that because of the national economy. It had nothing to do with the rate cuts. Well, from 2016 to 2019, US GDP grew by 9.3%. Robust. New Hampshire GDP grew by 11.6%. So we did something right during that time that made our economy grow faster than the US economy as a whole. And I want to address really quickly the issue of out-of-state corporations, because we hear this a lot. When we obtain the data from DRA, you know that the DRA reports tax filers in their end-of-year reports. We wanted to see, well, what about the actual taxpayers? You may file a business tax, file your business taxes, but not pay those taxes. So when you look only at taxpayers, out-of-state corporations that have headquarters outside New Hampshire totaled 10.6% of business profits taxpayers in fiscal year 2019. That's official state data. That means that 89.4% of the businesses that pay the business profits tax are New Hampshire-based businesses. So it is simply not true to say that this rate reduction or any BPT rate reduction is a giveaway to out-of-state corporations. 90%, just shy of the businesses that pay that tax are New Hampshire-based businesses. And they're not all corporations. They're not even mostly corporations. Again, this is from the DRA data that we got. Proprietorships are defined in state law as an unincorporated single person owned business. That's your typical mom and pop shop. They make up 20% of business profits taxpayers. Partnerships are another 20% of business taxpayers. Corporations make up just under half, 48% of business profits taxpayers in New Hampshire. Those are the real numbers. That's who pays this tax. So I think that's important to consider. And just as a last point, when you consider how much business tax revenue has come in over plan in the last decade, we're almost at $750 million above plan for the decade. Clearly businesses are being overtaxed. I would agree with the last couple of speakers who mentioned that this would be a good time to consider adding back into the bill the business enterprise tax rate cut from 0.55 to 0.50. That would make a lot of sense at this point. We certainly can afford it. And that's all I had.
Any questions from members of the committee? Hearing none?
All right.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
All right. Speaking in favor, Bruce Berkey from the NFIB. Bruce, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to be seen. For your record, my name is Bruce Berkey. I am the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. The NFIB in New Hampshire has over 1,600 small business members that are operating their businesses throughout the Granite State. And I will not repeat much of what has been said here this morning, but I think it's important to note that these reductions started out as a bipartisan effort back in 2015 and 16 under Governor Hassan. And they were talked about then as being 8.5 on the BPT going down to 7.5 and 0.75% of the BET going down to 0.5%. And so we would support the original bill that Representative Notter brought to the House Ways and Means Committee that had reductions for both of those taxes. The Ways and Means Committee chose otherwise. We would disagree with their decision and encourage the Senate Ways and Means Committee to also reduce the business enterprise tax, because that is the tax that is being paid by perhaps the next BAE. BAE started out as a very small company back in the 50s, I think maybe the 40s. Senator, you might know better than me. But it started out as Sanders, as a very small company, and grew to a corporate a giant in the state. And so these small businesses in New Hampshire need that promise, need that, I shouldn't call it a promise, but they need that direction that was given to them now 7 or 8 years ago. And we hope that we eventually get to those goals that the legislature and Governor Hassan had back in 2015. With that, I'll conclude my testimony and try to address any questions you may have.
Any questions from members of the committee? Hearing none?
Thank you
very much, Bruce. I would ask the DRA, you don't have to come up, but I'm going to ask you to see if you can put together a chart that would show the projected reduction in BET revenues, each 1/10 of a percentage point from 0.55 to 0.50. Thank you. All right. Is there anyone that has not spoken that wishes to speak? Is there anyone that has already spoken that would like to speak again? Representative Notter?
Thank you, Senator. I had one more thing to add. I have an example of an out-of-state business. Fidelity was once considered an out-of-state business. They're based in Merrimack, which is the town I represent, also Senator Daniels' district, and it was also the town that our late Speaker Dick Hinch lived in. They are now one of the biggest employers in the state. They have thousands of jobs. This is a success story, Fidelity, that House Bill 1221 seeks to accomplish.
Okay. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much. All right, we have 4 people that have remotely testified. Joseph Brown, a member of the public, representing himself in favor. Curtis Howland, representative of the public, representing himself in favor. Jesse Medeiros, a member of the public, representing himself in support. And Jeffrey Medeiros. Jesse and Jeffrey Medeiros, I would guess husband and wife, both supporting. With that, we'll conclude our testimony and the hearing on House Bill 1221. I would take a motion to go into executive session.
Move executive session.
Senator Daniels moves executive. Is there a second?
Chair, I'm not ready to vote on any of the outstanding ones.
No, we have something from the insurance folks, I believe, on the previous bill, 527.
Right, I'm not ready to vote on any of the bills that we have opened
Okay,
today.
that's including this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I withdraw my motion.
All right. With that, we're adjourned.